Eleanor Hayes had always known how to stretch a dollar. She knew how to make a single bag of rice last a week, how to smile at customers who treated her poorly, and how to hold her tears until she reached the car. She was 28 years old, and she was very, very tired. Her mother, Margaret, had been ill for nearly 3 years. The illness itself was manageable, but the bills it produced were not. They arrived in stacks every week, white envelopes with red numbers inside, and Eleanor opened every one of them at the kitchen table while her mother slept in the next room. She worked 2 jobs. She smiled. She managed. But the debt kept growing, and her brother Daniel still had 2 years of college left, and Eleanor was running out of time. She was washing dishes at the diner on a Tuesday morning when a woman in a gray coat came in and sat at the counter. The woman ordered coffee and a plain slice of toast. Then she slid a white card across the counter without a word. On the card was a phone number and 4 words, "When you are ready." Eleanor did not call for 6 days. On the 7th day, she opened her mother's most recent hospital statement and looked at the number for a long time. Then she called. The man on the other side of the arrangement was named Nathaniel Cross. Most people in the state of Virginia knew the name Cross. The family had been building things for 3 generations: buildings, companies, roads, and reputations. Nathaniel was the last of them. He was 38 years old, tall, and quiet in a way that people often mistook for coldness. He was not cold exactly. He was simply a man who had learned, after one very great loss, not to hold on to things too tightly. 6 years earlier, he had been engaged. Her name was Caroline, and she had laughed loudly at bad jokes and grown tomatoes on the kitchen windowsill and made Nathaniel's life feel, for the first time, like something warm. Then a car accident on a rainy November night had taken her away, and Nathaniel had put all of that warmth into a box and buried it somewhere deep inside himself, where it could not hurt him. He had built the rest of his life with great care after that. He had built it out of schedules and spreadsheets and business deals and discipline. And now, 2 years before his 40th birthday, his grandfather's will had presented him with a problem that none of his careful planning could solve. The estate, 400 acres in the Shenandoah Valley, including the family house where 5 generations of Crosses had lived, would pass to his cousin Bradford unless Nathaniel produced a child and heir before turning 40. It was an old clause, written in an older time, but it was legally binding. Nathaniel's attorneys had spent 8 months trying to find a way around it. They had failed. And so, on a Wednesday afternoon in September, Nathaniel Cross sat in a quiet office in Richmond and waited to meet Eleanor Hayes. She was not what he expected. He had expected someone desperate, someone who would nod at everything and ask no questions. Eleanor nodded at very little and asked several questions, including one that made his attorney shift uncomfortably in his seat. "If one of us falls in love," she said, looking directly at Nathaniel, "what happens then?" Nathaniel looked back at her. "That won't happen," he said. "Maybe not," she said. "But I'd like it in the contract regardless." The attorney looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Fine." A clause was added on the final page. If either party developed genuine feelings, the contract would be considered void, and both parties were required to renegotiate honestly. Nathaniel signed it without much thought. Eleanor signed it as though every word mattered. Because to her, every word did. She moved into the guest wing of the Cross estate on the 1st of October. Her belongings fit into one rolling suitcase and a canvas bag. The housekeeper, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Yardley, showed her to her rooms with the efficiency of someone who had seen many unusual things and stopped being surprised by any of them. The first 2 weeks were quiet. Nathaniel was away most days and distant most evenings. They passed each other in hallways and spoke in the polite way of colleagues who have not yet decided whether to become anything more. Eleanor explored the grounds, helped Mrs. Yardley in the garden when the older woman's knees hurt, and read in the evenings with a cup of chamomile tea. She did not feel sorry for herself. That was one of Eleanor's most stubborn qualities: she refused to feel sorry for herself. She had made a choice with open eyes, and she intended to live with it quietly and with dignity. It was 3 in the morning on a Thursday when the quiet broke. Eleanor could not sleep and had come to the kitchen for tea. She was standing at the stove when she heard footsteps and turned to find Nathaniel in the doorway in a dark sweater, looking as though he had not slept either. They looked at each other for a moment. Tea, she offered. He looked at the kettle. I don't drink tea, he said. I know, she said. The offer stands anyway. He came in. He sat at the kitchen table. She made 2 cups and set one in front of him. He did not drink it, but he did not leave, and neither did she. They sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes, and it was the most honest thing either of them had done in a very long time. The months that followed brought small discoveries, the way all honest time spent together does. Eleanor learned that Nathaniel had a greenhouse behind the east wing where he grew heirloom roses. He went there in the early mornings before the rest of the house was awake. She found him there once by accident and expected him to be annoyed. Instead, he told her the name of every variety without being asked, moving slowly between the rows, touching the petals with the kind of gentleness he showed nowhere else. Nathaniel learned that Eleanor solved the Sunday crossword puzzle in 11 minutes and had done so every week for 6 years. He also learned that she had once wanted to become a doctor, that she had given up that particular dream to care for her mother, and that she spoke about it without bitterness, which he found, for reasons he could not explain, more admirable than almost anything he had ever witnessed. At week 7, the pregnancy was confirmed. The doctor was professional and cheerful. Nathaniel sat beside Eleanor in the examination room and said very little. On the drive home, he asked if she needed anything. She said she was all right. He nodded and kept his eyes on the road. But at the next appointment, he drove her himself again. And the one after that. At 16 weeks, they saw the ultrasound together. A girl. Nathaniel stared at the screen for a long time. Eleanor watched him stare. She saw something move across his face that he did not try to hide, possibly because he did not know it was there. It lasted only a moment, but Eleanor saw it, and she filed it away carefully in the part of herself where she kept important things. Outside the walls of the estate, things were becoming complicated. Nathaniel's cousin Bradford had been watching the situation closely. A photograph of Eleanor, taken without her knowledge outside the doctor's office, appeared in a gossip column with an ugly headline. Nathaniel's attorneys released a statement. His assistant fielded calls from journalists. Nathaniel himself said nothing publicly, but Eleanor noticed that he began accompanying her to more of her appointments in person and that he no longer sent the driver alone. She did not ask him about it. But one evening she brought 2 cups of tea to the study where he was working and set one beside his papers without interrupting him. He looked up from his desk. She was already leaving. He looked at the cup for a moment, then picked it up and drank. The night that changed everything came in February. Eleanor was 28 weeks along when she woke at midnight with a pain that frightened her. She knew enough about her own body to know that something was not right. She got up and went to the hallway, and she met Nathaniel coming from the other direction, already fully dressed, because Mrs. Yardley had heard something and alerted him. They drove to the hospital. The roads were icy and the night was very dark and Nathaniel did not say a single word, but he drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw very tight, and Eleanor understood that he was afraid. The doctors determined it was early preterm distress. Everything was monitored carefully for several hours. By morning, both Eleanor and the baby were stable. The nurses were kind. The doctor was reassuring. Nathaniel had sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room for 4 hours without moving. On the drive home, he was quiet. Eleanor looked out the window at the gray winter fields. When they pulled into the driveway and the engine went off, she heard him exhale slowly beside her. Then he reached over and took her hand. He did not explain it. She did not ask him to. She looked down at their joined hands for a moment, then looked back out the window. They sat like that for a few minutes, in the driveway, in the cold, while the sun came up over the Shenandoah Hills. Clara was born on a Thursday in April. She was small and red-faced and she cried with great volume from her very first breath, which made the nurses laugh. Nathaniel stood at the window of the delivery room with an expression that Eleanor could not fully read, not joy exactly, not shock exactly, but something deeper than either, like a man who had been presented with something he had not known he was missing. In the days that followed, the contract sat on Nathaniel's desk like a stone. According to its terms, Eleanor had 60 days to vacate the estate. The money had been transferred to her account on the 3rd day. The financial part of the arrangement was clean and complete. Eleanor held Clara for 2 hours on the morning of the 4th day. She sat in the chair by the window in the nursery and held her daughter, and yes, Eleanor knew, in the quiet honest part of herself, that Clara felt like her daughter, even if the contract said otherwise, and she did not cry, because she had promised herself she would not. She kept that promise. She packed her single suitcase. She folded her clothes neatly. She said goodbye to Mrs. Yardley, who pressed her hand without a word. She walked to the front door. Nathaniel was standing in the hallway. They looked at each other. "Thank you," he said. His voice was very steady. "For everything." She nodded once. She walked out. She did not look back, because she had learned a long time ago that looking back at things you cannot keep only makes the leaving harder. The estate was very quiet after Eleanor left. Nathaniel told himself this was normal. He had always preferred quiet. He was good at quiet. He had built his entire adult life around the efficient management of quiet. But this quiet was different. It had a shape to it. It sat in the kitchen at 3 in the morning and in the passenger seat of the car and in the greenhouse between the roses. It sat across from him at the dinner table and left a space in every room he entered. He slept badly. He worked long hours. He was excellent with Clara, present and attentive and careful in the way he was careful with all things. But he found himself standing in the kitchen on a Wednesday night holding a box of green tea he had purchased and did not drink, and understanding, with the particular clarity that only sleeplessness and honesty can produce, exactly what the problem was. He called his attorney the next morning. "I have a question," he said. "What happens if both parties agree to void the contract?" His attorney was quiet for a moment. "Then the contract is void," he said carefully. "Both parties would need to consent in writing." "And the clause on the final page," Nathaniel said. "Does it still apply?" Another pause. "Yes," his attorney said. "If the contract is voided under those terms, both parties are required to renegotiate honestly." Nathaniel thanked him and hung up. Then he stood at his desk for a while, looking out at the greenhouse. He thought about a woman who had negotiated her own clause into a legal document because she had seen, more clearly than he had, what the contract was really missing. He picked up his car keys. Eleanor's apartment in Richmond was on the 3rd floor of a narrow building on a tree-lined street. She had found it quickly and furnished it simply, a few good pieces, clean curtains, a small kitchen where she had already organized everything the way she liked it. She was good at making a place feel like home. She was reading at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening when she heard a knock at the door. She opened it. Nathaniel was standing in the hallway in his coat, holding nothing, looking like a man who had driven 90 minutes without rehearsing a single word and had only just realized it. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I don't want to renegotiate the contract," he said. His voice was quiet. "I want to burn it." Eleanor was still for a moment. Then something very small changed in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something more honest than a smile. "You should have led with that," she said. She opened the door wider. He came inside. She went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. He sat at her table, in the chair across from hers, and looked around the small neat apartment with its good furniture and clean curtains and the book lying open where she had left it. He thought it looked like her. Completely and simply like her. She came back with 2 cups and sat across from him, and they were quiet for a moment in the good way, the way of 2 people who have decided to stop pretending that the quiet means nothing. They did not rush anything after that. Eleanor did not move back to the estate immediately. They spent 6 months in a slow and slightly awkward courtship that both of them found unexpectedly sweet, phone calls in the evening, dinners in Richmond and Middleburg, long drives through the valley in the fall with Clara in the back seat pointing at horses through the window. Eleanor got to know Clara properly. Not as a transaction. Not as the product of a contract. As a little girl who had her father's serious eyes and, rather unmistakably, Eleanor's stubbornness. Clara took to Eleanor with the directness of small children, who have not yet learned to be cautious about love. The cousin's legal challenge to the estate ultimately failed. Not because of Clara, though Clara helped. Nathaniel's attorney argued, on a close reading of the grandfather's will, that the clause had always been about demonstrating commitment to family and continuity, not merely biology. The judge agreed. Bradford Cross was, by all accounts, furious. Nathaniel was, by all accounts, unbothered. He had other things on his mind. They married the following spring on a morning when the Virginia hills were green and the air smelled of rain. The ceremony was in the greenhouse, between the heirloom roses. There were very few guests, Mrs. Yardley, who wore a hat she had purchased specifically for the occasion and cried quietly into a handkerchief. Eleanor's mother Margaret, who had recovered well and sat in a chair in the front row looking at her daughter with the particular pride of a parent who knows their child has survived something difficult and come out whole. Eleanor's brother Daniel, who shook Nathaniel's hand very firmly and said, "Nice to finally meet you properly." And Clara, who was 14 months old, wore a white dress, and fell asleep on Mrs. Yardley's shoulder halfway through the vows. On the table in the entrance hall of the estate, someone had placed the original contract. All 12 pages of it, in a neat stack. Across every page, in large red ink letters, someone had stamped a single word. Void. Eleanor looked at it on her way out the door, on Nathaniel's arm, into the spring morning. She had written that clause herself. She had written it because she had understood, from the very first meeting in that quiet office, that the most important things in any agreement are never the terms that protect you when everything goes right. They are the terms that protect you when everything goes beautifully, terrifyingly wrong. She had been right. She usually was. End.